The girl at the altar wasn't crying, she was calculating her chances of survival. 20 years old, white dress borrowed from a dead woman's trunk, and every eye in Silver Creek watching her marry the killer who'd just bought her father's debt. But when Elias Boone refused to kiss his bride, when he turned his back on tradition and offered his hand instead of his claim, the whispers started. Because in 1867 Montana Territory, mercy was more terrifying than violence. What the town didn't know, what Abigail Carter was about to discover, was that the monster they feared had just saved her from something far worse. If you want to know how a forced marriage became the most dangerous choice either of them ever made, stay with me until the end. And drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The church smelled like pine resin and fear. Abigail Carter stood at the back of the room, her fingers wrapped so tight around the wilted bouquet that the stems were cutting into her palm. She welcomed the pain. It was something real, something she could control when everything else had been ripped away. Her father wouldn't look at her. Thomas Carter sat in the front pew, shoulders hunched, staring at his boots like they held answers. Her mother had stopped crying an hour ago. Now she just sat there, hollow-eyed, clutching a handkerchief that had been her grandmother's. The lace was yellowed with age. Abigail had worn that handkerchief at her confirmation. She'd been 12, still believed in things like justice and protection and the idea that men kept their word. She didn't believe in much anymore. Miss Carter, Reverend Michaels cleared his throat. He'd baptized her, confirmed her, and now he was going to hand her over to a stranger like a bill of sale. It's time. The doors were open. She could run. The thought hit her the way it had been hitting her all morning, sharp, insistent, impossible. Where would she go? The debt her father owed didn't care about her feet or her pride. It would follow. It would find them. And next time there wouldn't be a way out that didn't end with her mother in a pauper's grave and her father swinging from a rope. So Abigail walked. The aisle felt longer than it had any right to be. Every step echoed. 37 people had shown up. She'd counted them while she waited, because counting was better than screaming. 37 witnesses to her execution, dressed in Sunday clothes in judgment. Martha Hewitt was whispering behind her fan. That woman could make a career out of other people's misery. Beside her, Samuel Brooks sat with his arms crossed, probably already composing the letter he'd write to his brother in Denver. You won't believe what happened in Silver Creek today. Abigail lifted her chin. If they were going to watch, she'd give them something to see. He was waiting at the front of the church. Elias Boone didn't look like the stories. She'd expected someone older, maybe, or marked by the violence everyone said he carried. But he was just tall. Broad-shouldered in a way that came from work, not posturing. Dark hair that needed cutting, a jaw that looked like it had been broken once and healed crooked. His clothes were clean but worn, wool trousers, a shirt that had been mended at the collar, boots that had seen miles. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just stood there like a man waiting for a storm to pass. When she reached the front, he turned to face her, and she got her first real look at his eyes. Dark, careful. And something else she couldn't name, something that made her breath catch wrong, because it looked almost like regret. Dearly beloved, Reverend Michaels began, and Abigail stopped listening. She focused on staying upright, on breathing in, breathing out, on not thinking about the fact that in approximately 4 minutes, she would belong to a man who'd killed 3 people in a land dispute 2 years ago. Or was it 5? The stories changed depending on who was telling them. What didn't change was the fact that Elias Boone was the kind of man you crossed the street to avoid. The kind sheriffs didn't question too hard. The kind who lived up in the mountains where the law forgot to look. And now she was going to be his wife. Do you, Elias Boone, take this woman? I do. His voice was quieter than she expected. Rough, like he didn't use it much, but steady, not cruel. That surprised her more than it should have. Reverend Michaels turned to her, and the whole church seemed to hold its breath. Do you, Abigail Louise Carter? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her father's debt was $800. She'd seen the papers, locked in her mother's sewing box like they were something shameful. $800 they didn't have, owed to a man who collected debts the way some people collected stamps. With interest, with threats, with visits in the night that left bruises no one talked about. Elias Boone had paid it, all of it, in exchange for this. Miss Carter? The Reverend's voice was gentle, pitying, That made it worse. I... She swallowed, tried again. I do. It came out as a whisper, but it was enough. Then, by the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I now pronounce you man and wife. Reverend Michaels closed his Bible with a sound like a cell door shutting. You may kiss your bride. This was it. The moment where he'd claim what he'd paid for, where she'd learn exactly what kind of man had bought her. Elias looked at her for a long moment. Then he held out his hand, not reaching for her waist, not pulling her close, just offering his hand, palm up, like she had a choice in whether or not to take it. The church erupted in whispers. Abigail stared at his hand. It was scarred, a long white line across the knuckles, another at the base of his thumb. Working hands. Careful hands. She took it. His grip was warm, firm, without being crushing. He turned toward the aisle, still holding her hand, and started walking. Not dragging her, not possessing her, just walking. Like they were two people leaving a church instead of a transaction. Behind them, someone gasped. Martha Hewitt, probably. Always Martha. Abigail didn't look back. Outside, the sun was too bright. It had snowed the night before, one of those late April snows that came out of nowhere and melted by noon, and the street was half mud, half slush. A wagon waited at the edge of the churchyard, packed with supplies and covered with canvas. Elias stopped beside it, released her hand, and gestured to the bench seat. Can you ride? It was the first thing he'd said directly to her. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He offered his hand again, just to help her up, she realized. When she was settled, he walked around to the other side and climbed up beside her. Not too close, leaving space between them like he understood what it meant to feel trapped. The church doors opened and people started filing out. Her parents were near the front. Her mother was crying again, quietly, into that yellowed handkerchief. Her father still wouldn't look up. Abigail wanted to feel angry, wanted to scream at them for letting this happen, for being weak, for loving her so much they'd sold her to save themselves, but she just felt tired. Abigail. She turned. Her mother had broken away from the crowd, was hurrying toward the wagon with her skirts clutched in both hands. Mama, don't! But Catherine Carter wasn't listening. She reached up, pressed something into Abigail's hand, and squeezed tight. Be brave, sweetheart. Be smart. And remember, you're stronger than you think. It was the handkerchief, the one from the church, the one that had been her grandmother's. Abigail's throat closed up. She managed a nod. Her mother stepped back, and Thomas Carter finally looked up. Their eyes met for half a second, just long enough for Abigail to see the shame there, the helplessness, the love that hadn't been enough to protect her. Then Elias clicked his tongue, and the horses started moving. They rode in silence. Silver Creek fell away behind them. The church, the mercantile, the saloon, where her father used to play cards before the debts got bad. The road narrowed, turned from packed dirt to loose gravel to something that was barely a trail. Trees closed in overhead, pine and aspen mixing together in a canopy that blocked out most of the sky. Abigail kept her eyes forward, kept her hands folded in her lap, the handkerchief tucked between her palms like a talisman, tried not to think about what came next. They'd been traveling for maybe an hour when Elias finally spoke. There's water in the canteen behind the seat, and bread, if you're hungry. I'm fine. Long ride ahead. You should eat. I said I'm fine. He didn't push, just kept driving, eyes on the trail, hands steady on the reins. Another hour passed. The sun shifted overhead, and the air got colder. They were climbing now. She could feel it in the way the horses leaned into their work, the way her ears popped when she swallowed. How far? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Another 3 hours to the cabin. We'll stop halfway to rest the horses. 3 more hours. Then what? A cabin in the mountains miles from anyone who could hear her scream. A man she didn't know who'd purchased her like livestock, who everyone said was a killer. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them harder together. You afraid of me? The question came out of nowhere, flat and direct. Abigail's head snapped toward him. Elias was still looking at the trail, but something in his jaw had tightened. It's a fair question. You got a right to be. Would it matter if I was? Yes. The word was so certain, so immediate, that it caught her off guard. She studied his profile, the crooked nose, the scar at his temple, the way he held himself like someone who'd learned not to expect kindness. "Then yes," she said quietly. "I'm afraid." He nodded once. Didn't tell her she was wrong, didn't make promises he couldn't keep. Just acknowledged it, like fear was reasonable, and kept driving. They stopped at a creek where the water ran clear over smooth stones. Elias helped her down without a word, then started unhitching the horses. Abigail wandered to the water's edge, knelt down, splashed her face. The cold helped, cleared her head enough to think past the panic that had been building since dawn. She was married, legally bound to a stranger. And no matter how gentle he'd been so far, that could change. Men changed. Her father had been gentle once, before the gambling, before the desperation. Kindness wasn't permanent. "Abigail." She turned. Elias was standing a few feet away, holding out a piece of bread and some dried meat. His expression was carefully neutral. "You need to eat. It's going to get colder before we get to the cabin, and you didn't have breakfast." "How do you know I didn't have breakfast?" "Your mother told me yesterday when we finalized the arrangement." The arrangement, like she was a piece of furniture they were moving. But he was right about the food. She took it, forced herself to chew and swallow even though everything tasted like sawdust. He ate standing up, quick and efficient, then went to check the wagon. Abigail watched him work. He moved with the kind of economy that came from years of doing things alone. No wasted motion, no hesitation. When he'd secured the load, he walked back to the creek, filled the canteen, and offered it to her first. "Thank you," she said, surprising herself. He just nodded. They got back on the wagon. The trail got steeper, narrower. At one point, they passed the burned-out remains of what might have been a cabin once. Abigail didn't ask about it. Didn't want to know. The sun was starting to sink when the trees finally opened up. The cabin sat in a clearing backed up against a rocky slope. It was bigger than she'd expected, solid logs, a stone chimney, windows with actual glass. A small barn stood off to one side, and beyond that, a split-rail fence marked off what looked like a garden plot. Elias pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake. "We're here." Abigail climbed down before he could offer to help. Her legs were stiff, her back ached, and the fear that had been sitting in her chest all day was threatening to climb up her throat. This was it. This was where the gentleness would end and the reality would start. Elias began unloading the wagon. She stood there, useless, watching him work. "There's a loft," he said without looking at her. "Clean blankets, a decent mattress. You'll sleep there." She blinked. "And you?" "I'll take the main room. There's a cot near the fireplace." We're not..." He stopped, turned to face her fully. In the fading light, his eyes looked darker, sadder. "I didn't marry you to hurt you, Abigail. I married you to keep someone else from doing worse." He picked up another crate, carried it toward the cabin. "You're safe here. That's all that matters." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt, but she'd learned better than to trust a man's word. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. A table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies. The fireplace took up most of one wall, and next to it, just like he'd said, was a narrow cot with a folded blanket. The loft was accessible by a ladder. Abigail climbed up, found a bed with a thick quilt, a small trunk, a window that looked out over the clearing. It could have been worse. That was what she told herself as she sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself shake. It could have been so much worse. Below, she heard Elias moving around, building up the fire, unpacking supplies, normal sounds, domestic sounds. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried to remember how to breathe. An hour later, he called up that there was stew if she wanted it. She didn't want it. Didn't want to go back down there, didn't want to sit across from him and pretend this was normal. But she was hungry, and refusing to eat felt like giving up. So she climbed down. He'd set out 2 bowls, 2 spoons. The stew smelled good. Venison, potatoes, something herbal she couldn't identify. She sat down carefully, kept her eyes on her bowl. They ate in silence. It should have been unbearable, but somehow it wasn't. It was just quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called. When she finished, Elias took her bowl without asking, washed it along with his own, set them on the shelf to dry. "There's a lock on the loft door," he said, still not looking at her. "On the inside. Use it if it makes you feel better." Abigail stared at him. Why would you give me a lock? Because you're afraid, and you should be able to sleep. He said it like it was obvious, like her comfort mattered more than his pride. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to fit this version of Elias Boone, quiet, considerate, careful, with the stories she'd heard. The killer, the monster, the man everyone feared. Thank you, she managed finally. He just nodded. You should rest. It's been a long day. It had been the longest day of her life, and it wasn't even over yet. She climbed back up to the loft, found the lock right where he'd said it would be. It was new, the metal still bright, the mechanism smooth. He'd installed it recently. Maybe yesterday. Maybe this morning, before he came to town to marry a girl he'd never met. She turned the lock, heard it click into place. Then she sat on the bed, still wearing her wedding dress, and let herself cry. Below, the cabin was silent. No footsteps approaching. No demands. No violence. Just silence and the sound of the fire. And the first small, fragile possibility that maybe, she'd misjudged everything. Dawn came cold and gray. Abigail woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of an axe hitting wood. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the memories crashed back and her stomach twisted. She was in the mountains, in a stranger's cabin, married. She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. The wedding dress was wrinkled beyond repair, twisted around her legs. She'd slept in it, too exhausted and too afraid to undress. The axe stopped. Footsteps crossed the clearing. Then the cabin door opened and closed. Coffee's hot, Elias called up. And there's biscuits. Her mouth was dry. Her head ached, but she was hungry enough that the smell of coffee was almost painful. She climbed down the ladder, acutely aware of how she must look. Hair tangled, dress ruined, eyes probably swollen from crying. Elias was at the stove, his back to her. He'd changed clothes, fresh shirt, different trousers. His hair was damp, like he'd washed at the creek. Morning, he said without turning around. Morning. He poured coffee into a tin cup, set it on the table for her. Then he went back to the stove, started pulling out biscuits. Abigail sat down, wrapped her hands around the cup. The warmth helped. She took a sip, strong, bitter, perfect. Elias set a plate of biscuits and butter in front of her, then took his own coffee and moved to the window, giving her space. Always giving her space. There's clothes in the trunk upstairs, he said, looking out at the trees. They were my mother's. Might need taking in, but they'll fit better than... He gestured vaguely at her dress. Your mother's? She died 6 years ago. Clothes have just been sitting there. There was no emotion in his voice, but something about the way he held himself told her it wasn't an easy thing to offer. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded. I've got work to do in the barn. You can do whatever you need to do. Settle in, look around. The creek's about 100 yards east if you want to wash up. Then he grabbed his hat and walked out, leaving her alone with her coffee and her thoughts. Abigail finished 2 biscuits. She couldn't help it, they were good, then went back up to the loft. The trunk was at the foot of the bed, plain wood with iron hinges. She opened it carefully, half expecting it to be empty. But inside were dresses, carefully folded. Simple calico and homespun, well made but worn. And underneath, a few other things. A shawl, some stockings, a Sunday dress in dark blue. She pulled out a brown calico, held it up. It would be too big in the shoulders, too long in the sleeves, but it would work. She stripped out of the wedding dress, left it in a heap on the floor, and put on the calico. It felt strange wearing a dead woman's clothes, but it also felt like shedding a skin. The girl who'd stood at that altar was gone. This was someone else now, someone who had to figure out how to survive. She found the creek where Elias had said it would be, washed her face and hands in water so cold it made her teeth ache. The forest was quiet, just wind in the trees, birds calling, the rush of the creek. It should have been peaceful, but Abigail couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for something to happen, for the other shoe to drop, for Elias to show his true face. When she got back to the cabin, he was still in the barn. She could hear him working, metal on metal, something being hammered. She stood in the doorway, uncertain. The cabin was hers now, supposedly, but it didn't feel like hers. Nothing felt like hers. She started cleaning anyway. It was something to do, something that made sense. By midday, she'd scrubbed the table, reorganized the shelves, swept the floor. Elias came in once to grab something, nodded at her, and left again. That night, they ate in the same careful silence. He'd made more stew, different this time, with rabbit instead of venison. "It's good," she said, because it was. "My mother's recipe. She was a good cook. She was good at most things." He paused. "You don't have to keep thanking me, by the way." "For what?" "For the clothes, the food, any of it. This is your home now. You don't have to thank me for things that are already yours." But it wasn't hers. Not really. And they both knew it. Still, she stopped saying thank you quite so much. The days started to form a pattern. Elias worked, fixing things, chopping wood, tending to the horses. Abigail cleaned, cooked, tried to make herself useful. They spoke in short sentences, practical things. "Pass the salt. It might rain tomorrow. The fire needs more wood." At night, she locked the loft door and lay awake, listening to him moving around below, waiting for him to try the ladder. He never did. A week passed, then 2. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the fear started to ease, not disappear. She wasn't naive enough to think she was safe just because he hadn't hurt her yet, but the constant, choking terror that had lived in her chest since the wedding started to loosen its grip. Elias was confusing. He was quiet, careful, almost obsessively respectful of her space. But there were moments when she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Not hungry, not possessive, just sad. Like he knew something she didn't. It was late afternoon, 3 weeks after the wedding, when everything changed. Abigail was outside, hanging laundry on the line Elias had strung between 2 trees. The weather had finally turned, real spring, warm enough that she'd rolled up her sleeves. She heard the horses first, multiple horses, moving fast. Her hands froze on the wet sheet she'd been pinning up. Elias was in the barn. She could hear him moving around in there. The riders came into the clearing from the south trail, 4 of them, armed, riding hard. They pulled up near the cabin in a cloud of dust. The man in front was older, maybe 50, with a thick beard and eyes like flint. He looked at Abigail the way you'd look at a piece of merchandise you were considering buying. "Well," he said, swinging down from his horse. "There she is." Abigail's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it. She took a step back toward the cabin. "Easy now," the man said, holding up a hand. "No need to run. We're just here to talk." The barn door opened. Elias stepped out, and the temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Maddox." His voice was flat, dead. The older man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Boone, been a while." "Not long enough." "Now, that's no way to greet an old friend." "We're not friends." Maddox's smile widened. "No, I suppose we're not." He looked past Elias, back to Abigail. "But we do have business to discuss, about that pretty thing over there." Elias moved. Not much, just shifted his weight, put himself between Maddox and Abigail. "You have no business with her." "That's where you're wrong." Maddox pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, waved it in the air. "See? I had an arrangement with Thomas Carter, signed and witnessed. He owed me money, a lot of money, and we agreed on terms. Then you came along and interfered. I paid his debt, it's done. You paid what he owed the bank, not what he owed me." Maddox's voice got harder. "That debt comes with interest, Boone, and the way I figure it, the girl is mine." Abigail's blood turned to ice. Elias didn't move, didn't raise his voice. But something in him changed, something that made the other men shift uneasily in their saddles. "She's my wife, legally married. You have no claim. Legal." Maddox laughed. "You think I care about legal? Out here?" He gestured at the mountains around them. "The law doesn't reach this far, and you know it. Then neither does your contract." The smile disappeared. "Give her to me, Boone, or this gets ugly." For a long moment, nobody moved. Abigail could hear her own breathing, too fast, too loud. Could see the way Elias's hands hung loose at his sides, ready, waiting. Then Elias spoke, quiet and certain. "No." Maddox's face darkened. "You're making a mistake. Wouldn't be my first. Last chance. You should leave." One of the other men reached for his gun. and the world exploded into motion. Elias's hand moved faster than Abigail's eyes could track. The rifle he'd been carrying in the barn was suddenly in his grip, aimed, fired, all in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The man who'd reached for his gun screamed. His weapon clattered to the ground, and he clutched his hand, blood seeping between his fingers. "Next one goes through bone," Elias said. His voice hadn't changed, still quiet, still calm, but the rifle hadn't wavered, and now it was pointed at Maddox's chest. The other three men had their hands up, backing their horses away. The wounded one was still cursing, trying to stop the bleeding. Maddox didn't move. He sat there on his horse, staring at Elias like he was trying to solve a puzzle he'd already seen before. "You shot Carson." "He was going for his gun. I shot his gun hand. Could have been his head." "That's my man, Your man tried to draw on me in my own yard. Be grateful I left him breathing." Elias shifted his aim slightly. "Now get off my land." "This isn't over, Boone. It is for today." Maddox's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he wanted to spit. Finally, he jerked his head at his men. "Let's go." They wheeled their horses around, the wounded man cradling his hand against his chest. Abigail watched them disappear back down the trail, her heart still hammering against her ribs. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Elias lowered the rifle. He stood there for a moment, shoulders tight, staring at the spot where Maddox had been. "Elias, get inside." It wasn't a request. Abigail's feet moved before her brain caught up, carrying her toward the cabin. Behind her, she heard Elias working, checking the perimeter, she realized, making sure they'd actually left. Inside, she gripped the edge of the table and tried to remember how to breathe. Her hands were shaking. Everything was shaking. The door opened. Elias came in, still carrying the rifle. He set it near the fireplace, then went to the window and looked out. "What?" Her voice cracked. She tried again. "What was that?" "That was Roy Maddox." He didn't turn around. "And he's going to come back." "Who is he? What does he want with me?" Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, tired. "He's the reason I married you." The words hit her like cold water. "What?" He turned then, and the look on his face was something she'd never seen before. Not quite guilt, not quite shame, something rawer than both. "You should sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me what's happening." "Then you're going to want to sit down for it." She stayed standing, crossed her arms, waited. Elias exhaled slowly, ran a hand through his hair. "Your father's debt wasn't just to the bank. He borrowed from Maddox too. Private loan, illegal interest rates, terms that would have kept him paying for the rest of his life." "That's not—" "It is. I saw the contract. Maddox showed me himself 3 months ago. Thought it was funny." His voice went flat. "The terms said if your father couldn't pay, the debt transferred to you." Abigail's stomach turned over. "That's not legal. You can't transfer debt to—" "Doesn't matter what's legal when nobody's looking. And nobody looks at what Maddox does. He's got the sheriff in his pocket, half the town council taking his money. Your father signed that paper knowing what it meant, and Maddox was counting on it." She wanted to sit down. Her legs felt like water, but she forced herself to stay upright, to keep meeting Elias's eyes. "So you married me to stop him from collecting?" "Yes." "Without asking me, without telling me what I was walking into. If I told you, would you have believed me, or would you have thought I was the threat?" He looked away. "You were afraid of me anyway. At least this way, you had a choice later." "What choice?" "I married you thinking—" She stopped, took a breath. "You let me think you were a monster. I am a monster, just not the kind you thought." The words hung between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Abigail sat down. Her legs had finally given up. "Tell me the rest." "There's not much to tell. Maddox wanted you. I wanted to stop him. So I went to your father, offered to clear his bank debt in exchange for marriage. Legal marriage, binding contract, filed with the territorial registry." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Thought it would be enough. Thought Maddox would back off once the paperwork was done. But he didn't. No, he didn't. "Why?" The question came out sharper than she meant it. "Why does he care so much? There are other girls. Other debts. Why me? Elias's expression went carefully blank. You really don't know? Know what? He was quiet again, and this time the silence felt different, heavier, like he was weighing something he didn't want to say. Your father worked for Maddox once, 5, 6 years ago, doing his books, handling transactions. Legitimate business, mostly, but enough gray area that your father saw things he wasn't supposed to see. Elias pushed off the wall, started pacing. He tried to leave. Maddox doesn't let people leave. So he made it expensive. Started calling in favors, extending credit at rates your father couldn't refuse. Trapped him. Abigail's throat was tight. And now he wants… what? Revenge? Control. Your father embarrassed him by trying to walk away. Taking you would be a message, to your family, to the town. Nobody leaves Roy Maddox. The room felt too small, too close. Abigail stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the trees. Her reflection looked back at her, pale, hollow-eyed, wearing a dead woman's dress. You could have told me, she said quietly. Before the wedding, you could have explained. Would you have believed me? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. She turned to face him, but I deserve the chance to decide. You're right. No argument, no excuses, just acknowledgement. I should have told you. I thought I was protecting you, but I was just making it easier on myself. Something about the honesty in that, the lack of defensiveness, made her anger slip. Not disappear, but shift into something more complicated. What happens now? She asked. He's not going to stop, is he? No. So we wait for him to come back with more men. Not exactly. Elias moved to the fireplace, started building up the fire even though it didn't need it, keeping his hands busy. There's something else you need to know about why Maddox hates me. Abigail waited. I had a brother, Elias said, still not looking at her. Younger, Caleb. He was 17 when Maddox hired him to work a lumber crew up north, promised good pay, safe conditions, standard lies. He added another log, watched the flames catch. Caleb got hurt, bad. Tree fell wrong, crushed his leg. Maddox's foreman refused to get him a doctor, said it would cost too much. By the time they brought him down from the mountain, infection had set in. The cabin was so quiet Abigail could hear the fire breathing. He died 2 days later. In pain, in a boarding house bed, with me holding his hand. Elias's voice didn't change, but his hands had stilled on the poker. Maddox never paid the wages he owed, said Caleb broke contract by getting injured. I went to him, asked for the money to bury my brother. He laughed. Elias, I didn't kill him. He said it flat, like he'd said it before, and expected not to be believed. I wanted to, but I didn't. Instead, I made sure everyone knew what happened. Told the story in every saloon, every trading post, every place I could find ears to listen. Maddox lost contracts, lost reputation, and he's been waiting to return the favor ever since. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were empty. That's what you married into. A blood feud you didn't ask for, with a man who doesn't forgive. Abigail stood there, trying to fit all these pieces together. The quiet man who'd given her space and locked doors. The brother who'd died in his arms. The monster everyone feared who'd chosen law over revenge. Why didn't you just kill him? She asked. Back then, when Caleb died. Everyone already thinks you're a killer. Why not make it true? Because Caleb wouldn't have wanted that. Elias set the poker down, gentle despite the shake in his hands. He was good, better than me, and I wasn't going to let Maddox take that too. The silence stretched. Outside, a bird called. The fire crackled. I'm sorry, Abigail said finally, about your brother. Elias nodded, didn't say anything else. She walked to the table, sat down, tried to think. So what do we do? We can't just wait here for him to come back. No, we can't. He moved to the cabinet, pulled out a wooden box she'd never seen before. Inside were papers, deeds, contracts, official-looking documents. He sorted through them, found what he wanted, held it up. This is the marriage certificate, filed in Silver Creek, certified by the Territorial Registry, and this, he pulled out another paper. This is the receipt for your father's debt, paid in full, witnessed, dated before Maddox's contract. What does that prove? That you're legally my wife, that the bank debt was satisfied before Maddox's claim. In court, It would void his contract. You said he owns the sheriff. He owns the sheriff in Silver Creek, not in Helena, not in the territorial courts. Elias spread the papers on the table. If we can get to Helena, file these with a federal judge, Maddox's contract becomes worthless. That's, what, 3 days' ride? 4, the way we'd have to go, through the passes, avoiding main roads. Abigail looked at the papers, then at Elias. You've been planning this. Since before the wedding. He started gathering the documents, careful with the edges. I didn't know if it would come to this. Hoped it wouldn't. But I wasn't going to leave us with no way out. Something in her chest loosened. Not trust, not yet, but something close to it. When do we leave? He looked up, surprised. You're willing to go? You said he's coming back. I'm not sitting here waiting to find out what happens when he does. She stood up, tried to ignore the fear climbing her spine. Besides, you got me into this. You can get me out. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. We leave at first light. Pack light, essentials only. It's going to be rough going. That night, Abigail barely slept. She lay in the loft with her small pack beside her, listening to Elias moving around below. He was preparing too. She could hear him checking weapons, organizing supplies, doing all the things that came before a dangerous journey. She thought about her parents, wondered if they knew what they'd signed her into. Her father probably didn't. He was weak, not cruel. But her mother had pressed that handkerchief into her hand, told her to be strong. Maybe she'd known. Maybe she'd hoped Abigail would be braver than they'd been. The handkerchief was still in her pocket. Abigail pulled it out, ran her fingers over the yellowed lace. Her grandmother had carried it through a prairie winter that killed half the wagon train. Her mother had carried it through childbirth and loss and years of quiet desperation. Now it was hers. And she was damned if she was going to let Roy Maddox make her a victim. Dawn came cold and clear. Abigail climbed down from the loft to find Elias already loading the horses. Not the wagon this time, just 2 saddle horses, packed lean and ready to move fast. Can you ride? He asked when he saw her. I can learn. He showed her how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to move with the horse instead of against it. She fell off twice in the first 10 minutes, landed hard on her hip the second time. Elias helped her up without commenting, just steadied her until she could try again. By the time the sun cleared the trees, she could stay mounted at a walk. It would have to be enough. They headed north, keeping to game trails and creek beds. Elias led, stopping every half hour to listen, to check their back trail. He moved like someone who expected trouble, and Abigail found herself scanning the trees too, jumping at shadows. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses. Abigail slid down, her legs screaming. Everything hurt. Her back. Her hips. Muscles she didn't know she had. Elias handed her water, then some dried meat. You're doing good. I fell off twice. You got back on twice. He checked the cinch on his saddle. That's what matters. They ate quickly, in silence. Abigail was too tired to talk, and Elias seemed focused on something she couldn't see, some calculation he was running in his head. How far did we get? She asked finally. Maybe 8 miles. Need to cover 20 before dark. I know, but we don't have a choice. Maddox knows these mountains. If we're still close when he comes looking, he'll find us. They mounted again. Abigail's legs barely cooperated, but she got herself up. The afternoon blurred into endless trees, steep climbs, the constant ache of muscles pushed past their limit. When they finally stopped for the night, Abigail practically fell off her horse. Elias caught her, reflex, nothing more, and steadied her until she found her feet. There's a creek over there, he said, pointing. Get the dust off. I'll set up camp. The water was ice cold and perfect. Abigail scrubbed her face, her hands, tried to work the knots out of her neck. When she got back to camp, Elias had a small fire going and was laying out bedrolls, 2 bedrolls, on opposite sides of the fire. She sat down, too tired to feel awkward about it. Eat, Elias said, handing her more dried meat and some hard biscuit. Then sleep. We leave before dawn. Don't you need to sleep? I will. Just later. He was going to keep watch. She realized it with a jolt. He was planning to stay awake, to make sure nothing crept up on them in the dark. You can't stay awake all night. I've done it before. That doesn't... She stopped, took a breath. Wake me in a few hours. I'll take a turn. He looked at her like she'd suggested something impossible. You don't know what to watch for. Then teach me. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded. All right, I'll wake you at midnight. She tried to stay awake, to prove she could do this, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could fight it. When Elias shook her shoulder, the fire had burned down to embers and the stars were bright overhead. Your turn, he said quietly. If you hear anything, horses, voices, anything that's not forest sounds, wake me. Don't investigate. Don't try to handle it yourself. Just wake me. I understand. He showed her how to feed the fire without making too much light, how to listen past the obvious sounds to the spaces between. Then he lay down on his bedroll and was asleep in seconds. Abigail sat there, wrapped in a blanket, watching the darkness. The forest was alive with sound, wind in the branches, small animals moving through the undergrowth, an owl hunting somewhere overhead. Every noise made her tense, made her hand move toward the rifle Elias had left within reach, but nothing came. The hours passed slow and cold, and when the sky started to lighten, Elias woke on his own. See anything? He asked, voice rough with sleep. No, just trees and darkness, and about 1,000 things that probably weren't threats. He almost smiled. Good. That's what you're supposed to see. They rode through 3 more days of that. Hard riding, cold camps, watches split between them. Abigail's body stopped screaming and settled into a constant, dull ache. She learned to mount without help, to read the trail ahead, to tell the difference between a branch breaking and something heavier moving through brush. Elias talked more as they traveled. Not a lot. He wasn't built for conversation. But small things. How to read the weather. Which plants were safe to eat. Stories about his brother, carefully offered, like gifts he wasn't sure she wanted. She took them, listened, started to understand the shape of the man behind the legend. On the 4th morning, they crested a ridge and saw Helena spread out in the valley below. Wooden buildings, church spires, the territorial courthouse, with its flag snapping in the wind. We made it, Abigail said. She'd started to think they wouldn't. We made it here, Elias corrected. Still have to file the papers and hope the judge is honest. They rode into town just after noon, dusty and tired and drawing stares. Elias ignored them, headed straight for the courthouse. Inside, a clerk looked up from his desk, took in their appearance, trail-worn, armed, clearly not from town, and frowned. Help you? Need to file documents with a federal judge, Elias said. He pulled the papers from his coat, set them on the desk. Marriage certificate and debt satisfaction. Territory of Montana, Silver Creek District. The clerk picked up the papers, squinted at them. This is irregular. These should have been filed locally. They were. We need federal certification. For what purpose? Contract dispute. Elias's voice stayed level. Third party claiming ownership of my wife. The clerk's eyebrows went up. He looked at Abigail, then back at the papers. You'll need to speak with Judge Harlan. He's in session until 3, then he's available for filings. We'll wait. They sat on a bench in the hallway for 2 hours. People came and went. Lawyers, plaintiffs, men in suits who looked important. Abigail watched them, tried not to think about what would happen if the judge said no. At 3:15, a door opened and a man in his 60s stepped out. Gray hair, sharp eyes, a face that had seen enough lies to recognize truth when he heard it. Judge Harlan will see you now, the clerk called. They stood. Elias picked up the papers, and together they walked into the judge's chambers. Harlan sat behind a massive desk, studying them. Mr. Boone, Mrs. Boone, I understand you have a filing that requires my attention. Elias set the papers on the desk. Yes, sir. We need federal certification that this marriage is legal and binding, and that the debt it satisfied takes precedence over any prior claims. The judge picked up the documents, read them slowly. His expression didn't change. Finally, he looked up. This is about Roy Maddox. It wasn't a question. Elias nodded. Yes, sir. And you believe his contract is invalid? I believe this marriage and debt satisfaction occurred before his contract could be enforced, making his claim void. Harlan leaned back in his chair. You know Maddox has friends, powerful friends. I know, but you're not one of them. The judge's mouth twitched. No, I'm not. He picked up a pen, signed the bottom of both documents with a flourish. Marriage certified. Debt satisfaction recognized. As of today, any claim Roy Maddox believes he has on Mrs. Boone is legally worthless. He looked at Abigail. Do you understand what this means, ma'am? It means I'm free, she said. Her voice shook, but the words came out clear. It means you're legally protected. Freedom. He glanced at Elias. That's something you'll have to work out between yourselves. They left the courthouse with certified copies of the documents. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the street gold. Abigail stood there, holding her copy of the marriage certificate, trying to process what had just happened. We should find somewhere to stay tonight, Elias said. Get a hot meal. Real beds. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we ride back. Show Maddox these papers. End this. She looked at him, this man who'd bought her to save her, who'd given her locks and space and truth when she needed it. Thank you, she said. For what? For not being what I thought you were. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. Come on, he said. Let's find that meal. They walked down the street together, two people bound by law and circumstance, and something neither of them had a name for yet. Behind them, the courthouse flag snapped in the wind, and somewhere in the mountains, Roy Maddox was waiting. But Maddox found them first. They were 2 days out from Helena, camped in a narrow canyon where a stream cut through granite walls. Elias had chosen the spot carefully, defensible, with clean water and good sightlines. But defensible worked both ways, and when Abigail woke to the sound of horses, she knew they'd been trapped. Don't move, Elias said quietly. He was already awake, already armed, positioned between her and the canyon mouth. Stay behind me. 7 riders came into view. Maddox led them, flanked by the same men from before plus 3 more. They spread out in a semicircle, blocking the only exit. Morning, Boone, Maddox called out. He looked pleased with himself. Nice camp you've got here. Real cozy. Elias didn't respond. His rifle was up, aimed at Maddox's chest, but Abigail could see the calculation in his eyes. 7 against 1. No cover. No way out without someone dying. You've been busy, Maddox continued. He swung down from his horse, casual as Sunday. Helena, the courthouse. That was clever. I'll give you that. It's over, Maddox. You have no claim. The judge certified it. Oh, I know. Got word 2 days ago. Federal certification, signed and sealed. He smiled. Doesn't matter out here, though, does it? Law's a long way away. Close enough. You think so? Maddox gestured at his men. I count 7 guns to your 1. Even if you're as good as they say, you won't take all of us before someone puts you down. And then what happens to your pretty wife? Abigail's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs, tried to steady her breathing. The rifle Elias had taught her to shoot was in her bedroll, 3 feet away. She could reach it, could maybe get 1 shot off before— Don't, Elias said, so quiet only she could hear. Stay still. We can settle this peaceful, Maddox said. You give me the girl, I let you ride out. Clean break, nobody has to bleed. No. Think about it, Boone. You did your part. Got her free of the debt. Gave her a fighting chance. But this? He spread his hands. This is suicide. And for what? A girl you barely know? She's my wife. On paper. But we both know what this really is. You wanted to hurt me. To take something I wanted. Fine. You made your point. Now let it go before it costs you everything. Elias was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady. I'm not giving her to you. I'm not letting you anywhere near her. You want her, you'll have to go through me. Maddox's smile faded. So that's how it is. That's how it is. Your brother would be disappointed. All that nobility, and look where it got him. Dead in a boarding house, screaming for medicine that never came. Maddox's voice turned vicious. You really want to die the same way? Stupid and pointless? Something flickered in Elias's expression, brief, quickly buried. But Abigail saw it. Pain, old and deep. My brother died because of you, Elias said. I'm not making that mistake. No, you're making a different one. Maddox nodded to his men. Take her. Kill him if he gets in the way. The clearing exploded. Elias fired first, not at Maddox, but at the man to his left. The shot took him in the shoulder, spun him sideways off his horse. Then Elias was moving, using the horses as cover, working the rifle like it was part of him. Another shot. Another man down, clutching his leg. Abigail grabbed her rifle, tried to remember everything Elias had taught her. Aim center mass. Breathe out. Squeeze. Don't pull. One of Maddox's men was riding toward her, pistol drawn. She fired, missed. The recoil knocked her back, and she scrambled to reload. "Get down!" Elias shouted. She dropped flat as bullets tore through the space where she'd been standing. Dirt kicked up in her face, stinging her eyes. When she looked up, two more of Maddox's men were on the ground. One wasn't moving. The other was crawling toward his horse, leaving a trail of blood. That left 4. Maddox and 3 others. "Enough!" Maddox's voice cut through the chaos. "Hold fire!" The shooting stopped. Elias was behind a boulder now, rifle aimed, breathing hard. Abigail could see blood on his arm. Not much, just a graze, but it was there. "You made your point," Maddox called out. "You can shoot, but you're outnumbered, and you know it. This ends one way, Boone. The only question is how many more of my men you kill before it does." "I can take all of you," Elias said. His voice was cold, final. "Question is whether you want to be first." Maddox actually laughed. "You know what? I believe you. You're good enough, fast enough. You might actually do it." He dismounted, started walking forward. Slow. Hands away from his gun. "But you won't, because you're not a killer. You're a man who wants to do right. And killing 4 men in front of your wife? That's not right. That's just revenge. Stop walking." Maddox kept coming. "You had your chance to kill me. 5 years ago, when Caleb died. You could have put a bullet in me then. Nobody would have blamed you, but you didn't. You chose law over blood. And that's who you are, Boone. A good man in a bad situation. I said stop. Make me." Maddox was 20 feet away now. 15. "Pull that trigger. Show your wife what you really are. Show her the monster everyone thinks you are." Elias's finger was on the trigger. Abigail could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was locked. 1 shot. That's all it would take. But he didn't fire. Maddox reached 10 feet, then 5. Then he was standing right in front of Elias, close enough to touch the rifle barrel. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. "You're weak, just like your brother." Elias hit him, not with the rifle, with his fist, savage and precise, catching Maddox square in the jaw. The older man went down hard, and Elias was on him, rifle forgotten, hands around his throat. "Say it again," Elias growled. "Say one more word about Caleb. I dare you." Maddox's men had their guns up, but nobody was shooting. They were waiting, watching. Abigail realized she'd stopped breathing. She forced air into her lungs, tried to think past the fear. This was it, the moment where everything broke, where Elias became what everyone said he was, and Maddox died, and they all spent the rest of their short lives running. Unless... She stood up. Her legs barely held her, but she made them work, made herself walk forward into the open where everyone could see her. "Stop," she said. Her voice shook, but it carried. "Elias, stop!" He didn't seem to hear her. His hands were still locked around Maddox's throat, and Maddox's face was turning red. "Elias!" Louder this time, sharper. "Let him go!" Something in her voice cut through. Elias's hands loosened, and Maddox sucked in a desperate breath. Abigail walked closer. Maddox's men tracked her with their guns, but nobody fired. They were confused, waiting to see what she'd do. She didn't know herself. She was operating on instinct and terror, and the sudden absolute certainty that if Elias killed Maddox right now, it would destroy him. "Let him up," she said quietly. "Please." Elias looked at her. His eyes were wild, barely human. "He doesn't deserve—" "I know, but you do." She held out her hand. "You deserve better than this. Better than him." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Elias released Maddox's throat, pushed himself back, stood up. His hands were shaking. Maddox rolled onto his side, coughing. When he could breathe again, he looked up at Abigail with something like surprise. "You just saved my life," he rasped. "No, I saved his." She looked down at him, and for the first time since this whole nightmare started, she felt something other than fear. She felt angry. "You want me? You want to collect on some contract my father signed in desperation? Fine. Here I am." She spread her arms wide, fully exposed. Maddox's men could shoot her right now if they wanted. Elias could pull her back. But she stood there, refusing to flinch. "Take your shot," she continued. "Drag me back to Silver Creek. Parade me through town as your prize. Show everyone what happens when someone tries to leave your orbit." She took a step closer. "But it won't change anything. That contract is void. The judge said so. The law says so. And killing Elias or taking me by force just proves you're exactly what everyone whispers you are. A coward who can't win unless he cheats." Maddox stared at her. Blood was trickling from his split lip, and his throat bore the marks of Elias's hands. "You've got spine," he said finally. "I'll give you that. I've got more than that. I've got federal papers that say I'm not yours. I've got a husband who was willing to die for me. And I've got enough witnesses right here to make sure everyone knows what happened if you try anything." She glanced at his men. "How many of them are willing to hang for kidnapping, Mr. Maddox? Because that's what this becomes the second you lay hands on me. Federal crime, federal noose." The canyon went quiet. One of Maddox's men, the one with the wounded shoulder, shifted in his saddle. "Boss," he said carefully, "maybe we should—" "Shut up, Carson." But Maddox's voice had lost its edge. He pushed himself to his feet, wavering slightly. "You think you've won." "I think you've lost," Abigail said. "There's a difference." Maddox looked at Elias, then back at her. Something calculating moved behind his eyes. "The debt your father owed me. That's separate from the one Boone paid. You understand that? I understand you're trying to find another angle. $800, plus 6 years of interest at 20%. That's—" He paused, doing math in his head. "Just under 2,000. Your father still owes it." Abigail's stomach turned. She thought they were done. Thought the papers meant freedom. "He can't pay that," she said. "You know he can't." "Then I'll take his land, his house, whatever he has left." Maddox smiled, and it was cruel. "Unless you want to negotiate new terms." "No." Elias stepped forward, putting himself between them again. "The debt ends here. You want payment, you take it from me. You don't have $2,000. I have the cabin, 80 acres of mountain land, timber rights, and 3 years of furs I haven't sold yet." His voice was flat. "Add it up. It's close to 2,000. Take it or leave it." Maddox's eyes narrowed. "You'd give up everything for her father? A man who sold her in the first place?" "I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it so she doesn't have to spend the rest of her life watching over her shoulder." Elias met his gaze. "And I'm doing it so this ends. Today. Right here. No more debts. No more claims. We all walk away and never cross paths again." The silence stretched. Abigail wanted to protest, wanted to tell Elias he didn't have to sacrifice his home for her family's mistakes. But the words stuck in her throat. Finally, Maddox nodded. "All right, the land, the cabin, the furs. In exchange for forgiveness of the debt and a signed agreement that I have no claim on the girl or her family." He paused. "But I want it in writing, legal, witnessed." "Fine. We go back to Silver Creek, draw up the papers, make it official." "No." Maddox shook his head. "Not Silver Creek. Neutral ground. Virginia City. 3 days from now. We meet at the land office, sign in front of a federal clerk, and it's done." Elias considered that. "Agreed, but if you or any of your men come near her before then, the deal's off, and I hunt you down myself." "Fair enough." Maddox turned to his men. "Mount up. We're done here." They gathered their wounded, helped them onto horses. Carson was pale from blood loss, but he'd live. The man Elias had shot in the leg wouldn't be walking right for a while, but he was conscious. As they rode out, Maddox paused at the canyon mouth. "You're a fool, Boone, giving up everything for a girl you barely know." "Maybe, but I'll sleep at night." Maddox snorted, then kicked his horse and disappeared around the bend. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Abigail finally let herself shake. She sat down hard on a rock, her rifle falling from nerveless fingers. Elias was beside her in seconds. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm—" She couldn't finish, couldn't find words for what she was feeling. "That was stupid," he said. His voice was rough. "Walking out like that. You could have been killed." "So could you. You were going to kill him." "I know. Would you have, if I hadn't stopped you?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably, He sat down beside her, suddenly looking exhausted. I wanted to. I've wanted to for 5 years. But you didn't. Because you were there, because I... He stopped, shook his head. Because some things matter more than revenge. They sat there in silence, listening to the stream, the wind in the canyon. Abigail's hands were still shaking. You're giving up your home, she said finally, for my father's debt. It's just land. It's everything you have. No. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Everything I have is sitting right here. The land's just where I used to keep it. The words hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Elias, we should pack up. Long ride to Virginia City. He stood, started gathering their supplies with the same efficient movements she'd come to recognize, avoiding the conversation, protecting himself. But something had shifted. Some wall between them had cracked, and Abigail could see through to the other side. She helped him pack in silence, and when they mounted up, she didn't complain about her aching legs or the long miles ahead. She just rode beside him, this man who'd given up everything twice over to keep her safe, and tried to figure out what came next. Virginia City was bigger than Silver Creek, dirtier than Helena. Gold Rush money had built it fast and careless, and now it was slowly rotting from the inside out. But it had a federal land office, and that's all they needed. They arrived a day early, took a room at a boarding house that had seen better decades. 2 beds, a washstand, a window that didn't quite close. Elias paid for 3 nights and carried their packs upstairs. You should rest, he said, setting her pack on the bed nearest the window. I'm going to check the land office, make sure everything's in order. I'll come with you. You don't need to. I'm coming. She said it flat, no room for argument. This is my fight too. He looked like he wanted to protest, then nodded. All right. The land office clerk was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the permanent squint of someone who'd read too many bad contracts. He looked up when they entered, adjusted his spectacles. Help you? Property transfer, Elias said. Meeting here day after tomorrow to finalize. Just want to make sure the paperwork's ready. The clerk consulted a ledger. Name? Elias Boone. Transfer to Roy Maddox. The clerk's eyebrows went up. That Maddox? Is there another? No, sir. Just surprised. He flipped through more pages. Everything's in order. Both parties need to be present, along with witnesses. You'll sign, he'll sign, I'll notarize, and it's done. Good. May I ask? The clerk hesitated. This is 80 acres of prime timberland, mountain water rights. You're aware of the value? I'm aware. And you're selling to Maddox for $2,000. That's significantly below market. It's a debt settlement, not a sale. The clerk's expression shifted. Understanding, maybe, or pity. I see. Well, the paperwork will be ready. They left. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the muddy street gold. You could back out, Abigail said. We could run, go to California or Oregon, somewhere he can't find us. He'd find us, and he'd find your family. Elias started walking back toward the boarding house. This way. It's done. Clean. Everyone walks away alive. Except you lose everything. I told you, I'm not losing anything that matters. She grabbed his arm, forced him to stop. Don't do that. Don't pretend this doesn't hurt. What do you want me to say, Abigail? That I'm angry? That I hate giving up land my family's held for 3 generations? That every time I think about Maddox owning it, I want to... He stopped, took a breath. Of course it hurts. But the alternative hurts worse. So I'm making my choice. It shouldn't be your choice to make alone. It's my debt now. I took it on when I married you. And I had no say in that? In any of this? She was getting angry now, frustration and fear, and something else she couldn't name all tangling together. You keep making decisions for me, Elias. You married me to save me. You're giving up your home to save me. When do I get to decide what I'm worth? He stared at her and something in his expression cracked. You want to decide? Fine. Decide. Tell me what you want, and I'll do it. If you want to run, we run. If you want to stay and fight, we fight. If you want me to hand you over to Maddox and walk away, I'll... His voice broke. I'll do it. Whatever you want. The street around them had gone quiet. A few people were watching, but Abigail didn't care. I want you to stop treating me like I'm something that needs saving, she said. Her voice was shaking, but she forced the words out. I want you to see me as a person who can stand beside you, not behind you. And I want... She stopped, swallowed. I want to choose to stay. Not because I'm trapped or obligated or afraid, but because I choose you. Is that allowed? Or have you already decided that too? Elias looked like he'd been hit. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. I never meant... He stopped, started over. You were always allowed to choose. That's why I gave you the lock. Why I kept my distance. I thought if you had space, you could figure out what you wanted without me pushing. And what if what I want is for you to stop keeping your distance? The question hung between them. Around them, Virginia City kept moving. Miners heading to saloons, women hanging laundry, the constant noise of a town that never quite slept. But in the space between Elias and Abigail, everything was still. You don't know what you're saying, he said finally. You don't know me. Not really. I know you gave up everything to keep me safe. I know you taught me to shoot, to ride, to read a trail. I know you had every right to claim me as your wife, and you never once tried. I know. Her voice caught. I know you're the first man who ever treated me like I mattered more than what I could do for him. Abigail, I'm choosing to stay, she said. After this is done, after the papers are signed and Maddox is gone, I'm choosing you. I need you to know that. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was calloused, warm, and his grip was gentle. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and when they reached their room, Elias didn't take the floor. He took the other bed, close enough that Abigail could hear him breathing in the dark. It wasn't much, but it was a start. 2 days later, Roy Maddox walked into the land office with 3 of his men and a lawyer who looked like he'd been pickled in whiskey. Elias and Abigail were already there, along with the clerk and 2 witnesses the clerk had rounded up, a shopkeeper and a mining foreman who had nothing better to do. Maddox looked almost pleasant, probably because he was about to get exactly what he wanted. Boone, Mrs. Boone. He nodded to each of them. Shall we get this done? The paperwork took an hour. Every clause had to be read, every term confirmed. The land, the cabin, the timber rights, the furs, all transferred to Roy Maddox in exchange for forgiveness of debt and a permanent release of all claims on Abigail Carter Boone and her family. When it was done, the clerk pushed the final document across the desk. Sign here, Mr. Boone. Elias picked up the pen. His hand was steady. He signed. Maddox signed next, his signature a flourish of victory. The clerk notarized both copies, handed one to Elias and one to Maddox. It's official, the clerk said. The property now belongs to Mr. Maddox and all debts are satisfied. Maddox folded his copy, tucked it into his coat. Pleasure doing business with you, Boone. He turned to leave, then paused. You know, I almost respect you, almost, but you're still a fool. Maybe, Elias said, but I'm a fool who can sleep at night. Maddox snorted and walked out, his men following. When they were gone, Abigail let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. It's over. It's over, Elias agreed. He was staring at the copy of the deed in his hands, his family's land signed away to the man he hated most. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Don't be. I made my choice. He folded the paper, put it in his pocket. Come on, let's get out of here. They walked out of the land office into afternoon sun. Virginia City sprawled around them, loud and alive and indifferent to what they'd just lost. What now? Abigail asked. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, small but real. Now we figure out what comes next, together. And for the first time since she'd stood at that altar in Silver Creek, Abigail felt something like hope. They didn't go back to the cabin. There was no cabin to go back to. Instead, they rode west out of Virginia City with everything they owned packed on 2 horses. Elias had maybe $300 left after supplies, enough to get them through a few months if they were careful. Not enough to start over, not really, but it was what they had. Where are we going? Abigail asked on the second day. They were following a creek through pine forest, no clear destination in sight. There's a settlement about 40 miles from here. Timber operation, needs workers. Thought I'd see if they're hiring. You've done timber work before? Some. Enough to not get myself killed. He glanced at her. It's hard work, dangerous, but it pays. She nodded, didn't complain. They were past the point where complaints mattered. That night they camped under stars so thick they looked like spilled salt. Elias built the fire while Abigail unpacked their supplies. They'd fallen into a rhythm over the past weeks, small domestic patterns that felt almost normal. I've been thinking, she said as they ate, about what happens after. After what? After you get work at the timber camp. After we settle somewhere. She poked at the fire with a stick. We're still married, legally, but we never talked about what that means. Elias set down his plate. What do you want it to mean? I don't know. That's the problem. She looked at him across the flames. 3 months ago, I didn't know you existed. Now you're my husband, and I'm choosing to stay, but I don't know what I'm choosing. Does that make sense? Yes. So help me understand. What do you want? From this? From us? He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. I want you to feel safe. That's first. I want you to have choices, real ones, not just the least bad option. He paused. And I'd like to build something with you, if that's what you want too. Build what? A life. A real one. Not running from Maddox, not hiding in the mountains, just normal. Work, home. Maybe someday. He stopped himself. Maybe someday what? Nothing. It's too soon to talk about. But Abigail could fill in the blank. A family, children, the future neither of them had let themselves imagine. It's not too soon, she said quietly. Not if we're both thinking it. His eyes met hers across the fire. Are you? Thinking it? I don't know. Maybe. I'm still figuring out how to be married to you without being terrified. She tried to smile, but it came out shaky. Give me time? Take all the time you need. They finished eating in silence, washed the plates in the creek. When they settled into their bedrolls, Elias lay down close enough that she could reach out and touch him if she wanted. She didn't, not yet. But she was thinking about it. The timber camp was exactly as brutal as Elias had described. 50 men living in rough barracks, working 12-hour days cutting trees that had stood for centuries. The pay was decent, the conditions weren't, and the foreman didn't ask questions. Elias got hired on the spot. Abigail got work in the camp kitchen, cooking for men who ate like they were trying to fill a hole in the world. They were given a small cabin at the edge of camp. 1 room, a stove, a bed that sagged in the middle. It was smaller than the loft she'd slept in back at Elias's cabin. Their cabin. The one that belonged to Maddox now. She tried not to think about it. The work was hard. Abigail's hands blistered from stirring pots. Her feet ached from standing all day. And the cook she worked under, a woman named Ruth who'd been doing this for 20 years, had no patience for mistakes. Stir it faster or it'll burn, Ruth snapped on the 3rd day. And don't add salt until I tell you. These men complain about everything. Abigail stirred faster, tried not to think about how much her back hurt, how her dress was soaked with sweat despite the cold. Elias came in at sunset, covered in sawdust and exhausted. He'd washed at the creek. She could smell the cold water on him, but there was a new cut above his eye and his hands were raw. You're hurt, she said. It's nothing. Log shifted wrong. He sat down heavily on the 1 chair they had. How was your day? Ruth hates me. Ruth hates everyone. Don't take it personal. She called me useless. You're not useless. He said it flat, like it was fact. You're learning. That's different. Abigail wanted to believe him, wanted to think she was getting better instead of just surviving. But every day felt like drowning in small ways. She made them dinner, beans and cornbread, nothing fancy. And they ate sitting on the bed because there wasn't room for a table. I heard something today, Elias said, breaking the silence. One of the men said Maddox is in Silver Creek, bought up the old mill, planning to expand. Abigail's stomach tightened. How far is Silver Creek from here? 3 days' ride, maybe 4. Too close. Not close enough that Maddox would bother coming out here, but close enough to feel like a weight on her chest. He's not going to let this go, is he? She asked. Even with the papers, even with the land. He's going to find some other way to come after us. I don't know. Maybe. Elias set down his plate. But we can't live waiting for him to show up. That's not living, that's just slow dying. So what do? We keep going, we work, we save money, we build something he can't take away. He looked at her. And if he comes, we deal with it then. Together. Together. The word was starting to mean something. 2 months passed. The work didn't get easier, but they got stronger. Abigail's hands stopped blistering. Her arms stopped aching quite so much. Ruth still snapped at her, but less often. Sometimes she even nodded when a dish came out right. Elias moved up from felling trees to working the saw. More dangerous, better pay. He came home most nights too tired to talk, but he always asked about her day. Always listened when she needed to complain about Ruth or the men who treated her like furniture. They were learning each other. The small things. How Elias liked his coffee. How Abigail couldn't sleep if it was too quiet. The way they moved around each other in the tiny cabin, developing a language of proximity and space. One night, about 3 months after they'd arrived at the camp, Abigail woke to find Elias sitting by the window, staring out at nothing. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He turned, surprised. "Didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just thinking." She sat up, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. "About what?" "My brother's birthday was yesterday. He would have been 23. The words hung in this dark cabin. Abigail didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to touch grief that old and that deep. "Tell me about him," she said finally. "Not how he died? Tell me who he was." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly he started talking. About Caleb's terrible jokes, how he could fix anything mechanical, how he'd wanted to be an engineer, had spent his evenings drawing plans for bridges and buildings he'd never get to build. Abigail listened. And somewhere in the listening, she moved from the bed to sit beside him on the floor, their shoulders touching. When he finished, his voice was rough. "I failed him. I should have stopped him from taking that job. Should have known Maddox would—" "You were trying to let him make his own choices," Abigail interrupted. "The same way you let me make mine. That's not failing him. That's loving him." Elias looked at her and something in his expression cracked open. "I don't know how to stop feeling like it's my fault." "You probably won't, not completely, but maybe you can learn to carry it without letting it crush you." She took his hand, laced her fingers through his. "And you don't have to carry it alone." He squeezed her hand, didn't let go. They sat there until dawn, not talking, just being together in the dark. It was 4 months into their time at the camp when everything went wrong. Abigail was in the kitchen, helping Ruth prepare lunch for the workers, when one of the men burst through the door. "There's been an accident," he said, breathing hard. "At the saw. Someone needs to fetch the doctor." Abigail's blood turned to ice. "Who?" "3 men. Don't know their names. Saw blade caught. Through shrapnel." She was running before he finished. Out of the kitchen, across the camp yard, toward the saw station. Other workers were already there, crowded around something she couldn't see. She pushed through. "Let me through. My husband—" Then she saw him. Elias was on the ground, conscious but pale. His left arm was wrapped in someone's shirt, blood soaking through. Another man, Carson, one of the other Sawyers, was worse. Unconscious, his leg twisted wrong. "What happened?" she demanded, dropping to her knees beside Elias. "Blade seized up," Elias said through gritted teeth. "Piece broke off. Caught Carson in the leg, me in the arm. I'm fine. Check on him." "You're not fine. You're bleeding." "Abigail, check on Carson." She wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him for being stubborn. But Carson was barely breathing, and someone needed to do something. She moved to the other man, pressed her hand to his leg where the blood was pumping out. "Someone get the doctor, now!" One of the men took off running. The next 20 minutes were chaos. The doctor arrived, an old man with shaking hands who'd probably been drinking but was the best they had. He worked on Carson first. The injury was worse, the blood loss critical. Abigail held pressure while the doctor stitched, tried not to look at how much blood there was. Carson survived. Barely. They carried him to the infirmary, and the doctor turned to Elias. "Your turn." Elias's arm was a mess. The metal had torn through muscle, might have nicked bone. The doctor cleaned it, stitched it, wrapped it tight. "No sawing for at least 6 weeks," he said. Maybe longer. You tear those stitches, you'll lose the arm. Elias nodded. His face was gray. They walked back to the cabin in silence. Inside, Abigail helped him lie down, then sat beside the bed and let herself shake. I thought... Her voice broke. When I saw all that blood, I thought... I know. He reached for her hand with his good arm. But I'm all right. Just a few stitches. It's not just a few stitches. You could have died. But I didn't. This time. She looked at him, and all the fear she'd been holding back came spilling out. What about next time? What about when the saw catches again, or a tree falls wrong, or... Abigail, stop. I can't. I can't keep watching you go out there every day, knowing you might not come back. I can't... She was crying now, and she hated it, hated feeling weak. I already lost everything once. I can't lose you too. He pulled her down beside him, wrapped his good arm around her. You're not going to lose me. You can't promise that. No. But I can promise I'll be careful. And I can promise that if something happens, it won't be because I gave up or stopped trying. He pressed his face into her hair. I'm not going anywhere, Abigail. Not if I can help it. She clung to him, let herself cry into his chest. He held her through it, steady despite his injury. And when she finally stopped shaking, he was still there. I love you, she said. The words came out raw, unplanned. I didn't mean to. I tried not to. But I do. He went very still. Abigail, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. I've loved you since the day you walked out in that canyon and told Maddox to take his best shot, he said quietly. I just didn't think I had the right to say it. She looked up at him, vision still blurred with tears. Why not? Because I bought you, legally, maybe with good intentions, but I still took away your choice. And loving you felt like another way of claiming something that wasn't mine to take. You gave me every choice you could. The lock on the door, the space, the time to figure out what I wanted. She touched his face, careful of the bruise forming near his eye. I'm choosing this. Choosing you. And I need you to believe that. I'm trying. Try harder. He almost smiled. Then he kissed her, careful and gentle and full of all the things they'd been too afraid to say. When they pulled apart, Abigail rested her forehead against his. We need to leave here. What? The camp. This work. It's going to kill you or Carson or someone else. We need to find something else. We don't have enough money saved to. Then we figure it out. We take what we have and we go somewhere safer, somewhere we can actually build something instead of just surviving. Elias was quiet, thinking. There's a town about a week's ride south, smaller than Silver Creek, bigger than a camp. I heard they need a blacksmith, and you could maybe open a bakery if we scrape together enough for an oven. You know how to smith? My father taught me, before he died. I'm not expert, but I know enough. Abigail considered it. A town. A shop. Something permanent. Something theirs. Let's do it, she said. As soon as you can ride. That could be weeks. Then we wait weeks. But we're leaving. She settled against him, careful of his injured arm. We're done with this place. 6 weeks later, they packed up their few belongings and left the timber camp behind. Elias's arm had healed enough to ride, though it still pained him. Carson had lost the leg. The doctor had taken it above the knee. But he'd lived. The town was called Ashford, and it was everything the camp wasn't. Clean streets, actual buildings, a church and a school, and 3 saloons that stayed civil. The blacksmith had died 2 months earlier, and his widow was desperate to sell the shop. Elias and Abigail stood in the empty forge, looking at the cold hearth and the tools gathering dust. It needs work, the widow said apologetically. Ben let it go toward the end, but the bones are good, and the house in back is solid. The house was small, 2 rooms, a loft, a kitchen area, but it was theirs. They could afford it if they used everything they'd saved and took out a small loan from the bank. We'll take it, Elias said. The widow looked relieved. You won't regret it. This town needs a smith. They moved in 2 days later, spent a week cleaning, repairing, getting the forge working again. Elias's arm wasn't fully healed, but he pushed through the pain, and slowly the shop started coming back to life. Abigail took work at the general store while they saved for a bakery. The owner, a woman named Margaret, was fair and paid decent wages. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. At night, they'd come home to their small house, cook together, talk about the day. And sometimes, when the work was done and the dishes were washed, they'd just sit together on the porch and watch the street settle into quiet. It was almost peaceful, almost normal. And then 3 months after they'd arrived in Ashford, Roy Maddox rode into town with a dozen armed men and a warrant for Elias's arrest. Abigail was at the store when it happened. She saw the riders come in, saw the way people scattered, and her stomach dropped. She ran. The forge was on the edge of town, and by the time she got there, Maddox's men had already surrounded it. Elias stood in the doorway, hammer in hand, facing them down. "This is a mistake," he was saying. His voice was level, but Abigail could see the tension in his shoulders. "I haven't broken any laws." "Murder warrant says different." Maddox was still on his horse, looking smug. "Sheriff in Silver Creek finally got around to investigating that shootout in the canyon. Turns out one of my men died from his wounds, and you're the one who shot him. That was self-defense. You attacked us. Your word against mine. And the sheriff believes me." Maddox gestured to one of his men, who held up an official-looking paper. "So you're coming back to Silver Creek, one way or another." Abigail pushed through the crowd that was forming. "This is illegal. He defended us from an attack. You can't—" "Stay out of this, girl." Maddox didn't even look at her. "This is between me and your husband. Like hell it is." She moved to stand beside Elias. "You're using the law to settle a personal grudge. Everyone here knows it. What I'm doing is bringing in a murderer." Maddox finally looked at her, and his expression was cold. "You want to stop me? Get a lawyer. File a complaint. Do it through proper channels. Until then, he's under arrest." One of the men moved forward with shackles. Elias didn't resist, just set down the hammer and held out his wrists. "No," Abigail said. "No, you can't." "It's all right," Elias said quietly. "Let them take me. Don't fight." "I'm not letting them." "Abigail." He looked at her and his eyes were calm, resigned. "Trust me. Let them take me. Then go to the sheriff here, explain what happened. Get help. They'll hang you before I can—" "They won't. Maddox wants a trial. He wants everyone to see." Elias's voice dropped. "He wants me broken, not just dead. That gives you time." The man with the shackles snapped them on. Elias didn't flinch. Maddox smiled. "Smart choice, Boone. Your wife should take notes." They led Elias to a horse, tied his hands to the saddle. The whole town was watching now, silent and useless. Abigail stood there, shaking with rage and fear and helplessness. This was it. This was how Maddox won. Not by taking her, but by destroying the man who'd protected her. As they rode out, Elias looked back once, met her eyes. And in that look was everything they'd built together, everything they stood to lose. Then he was gone, and Abigail was alone in the middle of the street with a crowd of strangers and no idea how to save him. But she was done being helpless, done letting other people decide her fate. She turned and walked straight to the sheriff's office, her mind already working through what came next. Maddox thought he'd won, thought he'd finally gotten his revenge. He had no idea what was coming. The sheriff of Ashford was a man named Porter, mid-50s, balding, with the kind of face that had seen enough trouble to recognize more when it walked through his door. Abigail was trouble, and she knew it. "Mrs. Boone." He stood when she entered, gestured to a chair. "I saw what happened. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't get my husband back." She stayed standing. "That warrant is false. Maddox is using it to settle a grudge." "Maybe so, but it's got the Silver Creek Sheriff's signature on it. That makes it legal, whether I like it or not." "Then go to Silver Creek. Investigate. Talk to witnesses." "I have no jurisdiction there, ma'am. And even if I did—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Roy Maddox owns that town. The sheriff, the judge, half the council. Your husband won't get a fair trial. So you're just going to let them hang him." "I didn't say that." Porter sat down heavily. "I said he won't get a fair trial in Silver Creek, but he might get one in Helena. Federal court. If someone could get Judge Harlan to issue a transfer order—" Abigail's mind was already racing. "How long would that take?" "Week, maybe 2, assuming the judge agrees to hear the case." "Elias doesn't have 2 weeks. Maddox will push for a quick trial, quick execution. You know he will." "Yes, ma'am. I expect he will." Porter met her eyes. "Which is why you need to ride to Helena tonight. Don't wait. Don't pack. Just go." I can't just, you can and you will, because your husband is counting on you to be smart, not sentimental. He stood, walked to a cabinet, pulled out a sealed envelope. This is a letter to Judge Harlan. I'm requesting federal intervention on grounds of judicial corruption. It's not much, but it might buy you an audience. Abigail took the letter with shaking hands. Why are you helping me? Because I've met Roy Maddox, and I've met men like your husband, good men who got caught in bad situations. He paused. And because my daughter is about your age, if someone did to her what Maddox is doing to you, I'd hope somebody would help. She wanted to hug him, wanted to break down and cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and headed for the door. Mrs. Boone, Porter called after her, ride fast and don't stop for anything. She rode through the night, pushing her horse harder than she should have. The moon was half full, giving just enough light to see the trail. Every shadow looked like Maddox's men. Every sound made her jump. But nothing stopped her. She reached Helena 36 hours later, half dead from exhaustion, her horse lathered and stumbling. She went straight to the courthouse, didn't bother cleaning up or resting. The clerk took one look at her and frowned. Ma'am, I need to see Judge Harlan, now. The judge doesn't take walk-ins. You need to schedule. She slammed Porter's letter on the desk. Read that. Then tell me I need to schedule an appointment. The clerk's eyes widened as he read. He looked up at her, then at the letter, then back at her. Wait here. He disappeared into the back. Abigail stood there, swaying slightly, trying to stay upright through sheer force of will. 5 minutes later, Judge Harlan himself came out. He looked older than she remembered, more tired, but his eyes were sharp. Mrs. Boone, you look like you've ridden through hell. Close enough, sir. Come with me. His chambers were exactly as she remembered. The massive desk, the shelves of law books, the window overlooking the street. He gestured for her to sit, and this time she did. Her legs wouldn't hold her much longer. Tell me what happened, he said. All of it. She told him. The canyon fight. The man who died weeks later from infection, not from the bullet wound itself. The warrant Maddox had manufactured. The arrest in Ashford. Harlan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. This is a problem, he said finally. Maddox is claiming jurisdiction based on where the alleged crime occurred. Silver Creek. That means Silver Creek law applies, and I can't simply override their warrant. Abigail's heart sank. So there's nothing you can do. I didn't say that. He stood, walked to his bookshelf, pulled down a thick volume. There's a territorial statute that allows for federal intervention when there's evidence of judicial corruption or abuse of process. If I can establish that Maddox is manipulating the system for personal gain, I can order a transfer to federal court. Can you establish that? I can try, but I need evidence, testimony, something more than your word against his. He looked at her. You know anyone in Silver Creek who'd be willing to testify against Maddox? She thought about it. Most people in Silver Creek were either scared of Maddox or in his pocket, but there was one person who might help. Reverend Michaels, she said. He married us. He knows what Maddox is, and he's one of the few people in town Maddox can't threaten into silence. Will he testify? I don't know, but I can ask. Harlan nodded. Then ask. Fast. I'll draft the transfer order, but I need supporting evidence before I can issue it. 3 days, Mrs. Boone. That's all the time you have. She stood on legs that felt like water. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. This is a long shot, and we both know it. He walked her to the door. But I've never liked bullies. And Maddox is the worst kind, the kind with a badge. Abigail rode back toward Silver Creek, every mile feeling like a countdown. She stopped at Ashford first, changed horses, grabbed the documents from the cabin. The marriage certificate, the debt satisfaction, the land transfer, everything that proved Maddox's grudge was personal, not legal. Margaret from the general store stopped her as she was leaving. Mrs. Boone, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. I'm fixing it. If there's anything I can do, pray he's still alive when I get there. The words came out harsh, but Abigail didn't have time for gentle. She mounted up and rode. Silver Creek looked exactly the same as the day she'd left it. The church, the mercantile, the saloon, people on the street who'd watched her marry a stranger and done nothing to help. She rode straight to the church. Reverend Michaels was inside, organizing hymnals. He looked up when she entered, and his face went pale. "Abigail, I heard, is it true? About Elias?" "It's true. Maddox arrested him on a murder charge, false charge, and I need your help." He set down the hymnals carefully. "What kind of help?" "Testimony. In front of Judge Harlan. About Maddox's corruption, his threats, how he operates in this town." Michaels was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to the door, looked out at the street. "If I testify against Maddox, he'll destroy me. This church, my position, everything." "I know. And you're asking me to do it anyway. I'm asking you to do what's right, the way you're supposed to." She moved to stand beside him. "You married me to a man I didn't know because my father was desperate. You watched Maddox terrorize this town for years and said nothing. And now you have a chance to actually help someone instead of just offering prayers after the damage is done." He flinched. "That's not fair. Nothing about this is fair, but you can make it right. Or you can let an innocent man hang because you're too scared to stand up." Michaels looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Shame, maybe. Or the beginnings of courage he'd forgotten he had. "When do we leave?" he asked quietly. They rode for Helena that afternoon. Michaels brought another man with him, Samuel Brooks, the one who'd sat in the church watching Abigail's wedding with his arms crossed. He was a county clerk, had access to records that could prove Maddox's financial manipulation of the town. "Why are you helping?" Abigail asked him during a rest stop. Brooks shrugged. "I'm tired of being afraid. And my brother in Denver asked me once why I stayed in a town run by a criminal. Couldn't give him a good answer." He looked at her. "Besides, what Maddox did to you and your husband, that was wrong. Someone needs to say it out loud." They reached Helena late on the second day. Judge Harlan met with them immediately, took their statements, reviewed the financial records Brooks had brought. When they finished, he sat back and rubbed his eyes. "This is enough, barely, but it's enough." He drafted the transfer order that night. Federal custody, federal trial. And most importantly, a stay of execution pending the hearing. "I'll send a marshal to Silver Creek first thing in the morning," Harlan said. "He'll take Elias into federal custody and bring him here. What if Maddox resists? Then the marshal has authority to arrest him for obstruction." Harlan's expression was grim. "But Maddox is smart. He'll comply. He has to, or he loses everything." Abigail wanted to feel relief, wanted to believe it was over, but she wouldn't feel safe until Elias was actually here, actually free. "Can I go with the marshal?" she asked. "To Silver Creek?" "No, ma'am. Too dangerous. Maddox might not hurt a federal officer, but he has no reason to show you the same courtesy." Harlan stood. "Go home. Rest. I'll send word when your husband arrives." She didn't go home. She couldn't. Instead, she took a room at a boarding house and spent the night pacing, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything except Elias in a Silver Creek jail cell, waiting. The marshal returned 2 days later. With him, in shackles but alive, was Elias. Abigail ran to him before they'd even dismounted. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine." He looked exhausted, thinner than when she'd seen him last, but his eyes were clear. "You did it. You actually did it." "Not yet. Still have to get through the trial. One thing at a time." He glanced at the marshal, who was unlocking the shackles. "Thank you for coming to get me. I was starting to think, I know what you were starting to think. Don't." She took his hand as soon as it was free. "We're finishing this. Together." The trial was set for a week later. Federal court, impartial jury, a prosecutor who wasn't in Maddox's pocket. It should have been a relief. But Maddox showed up anyway, sitting in the back of the courtroom with his lawyer, watching everything with that same calculating expression. The prosecutor presented the case. Self-defense, multiple witnesses to Maddox's attack, medical testimony that the man who'd died had succumbed to infection, not the bullet wound, an infection likely caused by inadequate medical care on Maddox's part. Elias testified. Calm, direct, no embellishment. Just the facts of what happened in that canyon. When it was the defense's turn, Maddox's lawyer tried to paint Elias as a violent man with a history of threats. But every time he brought up the stories, the killings, the reputation, the prosecutor countered with evidence that none of it was true, that Elias had never been charged with a crime, that the rumors all traced back to Maddox himself, spread deliberately to isolate and intimidate. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, the foreman stood and read the verdict in a voice that carried through the silent courtroom. On the charge of murder, we find the defendant not guilty. Abigail's knees went weak. Beside her, Elias closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for months. The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Boone, you're free to go. This court finds that the original warrant was issued in bad faith, and all charges are hereby dismissed with prejudice." He looked at Maddox then, and his expression hardened. "Mr. Maddox, you will remain in Helena. The territorial prosecutor wants to speak with you regarding possible charges of abuse of process and judicial corruption." Maddox stood slowly. For the first time since Abigail had met him, he looked uncertain. "This is harassment. I was acting within my rights as—" "You were acting as a man with a personal vendetta using the law as a weapon," the judge interrupted. "And that ends today. Marshal, please escort Mr. Maddox to the territorial courthouse." As Maddox was led out, he passed Elias and Abigail. He stopped, met Elias's eyes. "This isn't over, Sith," he said quietly. "Yes, it is." Elias's voice was steady, final. "You lost, not because I beat you, but because you couldn't let go of something that was never yours to hold." For a moment, something flickered in Maddox's expression, not quite regret, but recognition, maybe. An understanding that he'd spent 5 years destroying himself over pride and revenge. Then he was gone, and it was just Elias and Abigail standing in an emptying courtroom. "Is it really over?" she asked. "The legal part is. The rest—" He took her hand. "The rest is up to us." They walked out into Helena's sunshine. The street was busy, people going about their lives, unaware that something huge had just shifted, that a man had been freed and another had finally been stopped. Reverend Michaels was waiting outside. He looked nervous but determined. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "We're all right," Elias said. "Thank you for testifying. I know what it cost you." "It cost me less than staying silent would have." Michaels paused. "I'm leaving Silver Creek, taking a position in a church up north, somewhere Maddox's reach doesn't extend." "Good," Abigail said. "You deserve a fresh start." He smiled, small but genuine. "So do you. Both of you." He tipped his hat and walked away. Samuel Brooks found them next, shook Elias's hand. "Glad to see justice actually worked for once. Doesn't happen often enough." "No, it doesn't." Elias paused. "You staying in Silver Creek?" "For now. Someone needs to keep an eye on things. Make sure whoever replaces Maddox isn't just another version of him." Brooks grinned. "Besides, I already sent that letter to my brother. Told him I finally had a good answer about why I stay." They parted ways, and Elias and Abigail started the long walk back to the boarding house. "What now?" Abigail asked. "We go back to Ashford? Back to the forge?" "Do you want to?" She thought about it. The small house? The shop that was just starting to find its footing? The town that had watched Elias get arrested and done nothing? "No," she said finally. "I want to go somewhere new, somewhere that's ours from the beginning. No history, no debts, no shadows." "Oregon?" Elias suggested. "I heard there's good land for cheap, rivers full of salmon, timber for building." "Oregon sounds far away." "It is. 3 months' travel, maybe more." He looked at her. "But far away might be exactly what we need." She squeezed his hand. "Then let's go to Oregon." They left Helena a week later, after selling everything they couldn't carry. The forge equipment, the furniture, the small pieces of life they'd built in Ashford. It hurt less than Abigail expected. Turned out she'd gotten good at letting go of things that didn't matter and holding tight to what did. The journey west was long and hard. They joined a wagon train heading to Portland, traveled with families and farmers and people running from the same kinds of things they were. Debts, mistakes, pasts that had sharp edges. Abigail learned to drive the wagon while Elias walked ahead, scouting. She learned to cook over an open fire, to fix a broken axle, to deliver a baby when one of the women went into labor 3 weeks early and the nearest doctor was 2 days behind them. Elias learned to let people help, to accept that he didn't have to carry everything alone. That strength sometimes looked like admitting you were tired and letting someone else take watch. They fought, small arguments about whether to ford a river or wait for the water to drop. Bigger ones about how much to share with the other families, how much to keep private. They were learning how to be married beyond the crisis, how to navigate ordinary frustrations without the backdrop of danger to distract them. It was harder than fighting Maddox in some ways, more complicated, but they figured it out. One day, one conversation, one compromise at a time. 5 months after leaving Helena, they crossed into Oregon territory. The land was green, dense with trees, rivers cutting through valleys that looked like they'd never seen a plow. They found a place about 20 miles from a settlement called Corvallis. Creek running through it, good soil, forest on 3 sides. Nobody else wanted it because it was too far from town, too isolated. For Elias and Abigail, it was perfect. They built a cabin that winter, smaller than the one Elias had lost, but solid. They worked side by side, fitting logs and chinking gaps, learning the rhythm of shared labor. Other families from the wagon train settled nearby, not close. This was Oregon, and people valued space, but within riding distance. They helped each other with harvests, with barn raisings, with the 100 small disasters that came from trying to carve civilization out of wilderness. Abigail started taking in mending work, then baking bread to sell in Corvallis. Her baking was better than her mending, and word spread. Within a year, she had enough customers that Elias built her a proper outdoor oven. He set up a small forge behind the cabin. Nothing like the shop in Ashford, but enough to make tools, repair equipment, earn money when the winter was too harsh for other work. They weren't rich, probably never would be, but they had enough. And more importantly, they had each other. 2 years after settling in Oregon, Abigail missed her monthly bleeding. Then the next one. By the 3rd month, she was certain. She told Elias on a Sunday afternoon while they were sitting on the porch watching rain roll across the valley. "I'm pregnant," she said, just like that. No preamble. He turned to look at her, eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. I've been sick every morning for 2 weeks, and my body feels different." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, genuinely smiled, the kind that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "We're going to have a baby," he said, like he was testing the words. "An actual baby. That's generally how it works." He laughed, actually laughed. It was a sound she'd heard maybe a dozen times in all their years together, and it never got old. "I don't know how to be a father," he said when he stopped laughing. "I don't know how to be a mother. We'll figure it out together." She leaned against him, like everything else. The baby came in early spring, a girl screaming and red-faced and perfect. They named her Caleb, shortened to Callie, because Elias's brother deserved to be remembered as something other than a tragedy. Abigail held her daughter and thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. Her father's debt, the forced marriage, the fear and the fighting and the long, hard road to something like peace. She wouldn't wish any of it on someone else, but she also wouldn't undo it, because this, Elias sleeping in the chair beside the bed, exhausted from a night of pacing and worrying, their daughter in her arms, the cabin they'd built with their own hands, this was worth every hard mile. Callie grew into a fierce little thing, all stubborn determination and her father's dark eyes. She learned to walk early, climb before she should have been able to, and had opinions about everything. Elias was terrified of her. Abigail could see it in the way he held her so carefully, like she might break, and how he'd pace the floor when she cried, trying everything to soothe her. "You face down armed men," Abigail said one night, watching him try to get Callie to sleep. "But a 7-pound baby scares you?" "Armed men, I understand. This—" He looked down at their daughter, who was finally starting to drowse. "This is someone I could fail, someone who depends on me not to mess up." "You're not going to mess up. You don't know that." "I do, actually, because you care about getting it right. That's most of what matters." She stood, took Callie from him, laid her in the cradle Elias had built. "The rest we'll figure out as we go, like everything else." Years passed. They added on to the cabin, another room, then a loft, then a proper workshop for Elias. Callie got a brother, then a sister. The valley filled in with more families, and eventually someone built a school. Abigail's bakery business grew until she had to hire help. Elias taught metalwork to some of the younger men in the area, passed on what his father had taught him. They got older. Life got easier in some ways, harder in others. There were lean years when the crops failed, hard winters when they burned through their savings just to stay warm. A summer when all 3 kids got sick at once, and Abigail didn't sleep for 5 days straight. But there were good times too. Harvests that came in heavy, birthdays and holidays, the quiet satisfaction of watching their children grow into people with their own thoughts and dreams. And through all of it, Elias and Abigail learned how to be married. Not the desperate survival version they'd started with, but the real thing, the choosing each other every day even when it wasn't easy, the forgiving and the compromising and the growing together instead of apart. They heard about Maddox once, about 10 years after they'd settled in Oregon. A traveler passing through mentioned that he'd been convicted of fraud and corruption, served 5 years in a territorial prison, and died broke and alone. Abigail felt nothing when she heard it. No satisfaction, no relief. Just a distant recognition that a chapter of her life had finally, completely closed. Elias never talked about it, but that night he held her a little tighter and she knew he felt the same. On their 20th anniversary, they counted from the day they'd signed the papers in Virginia City, not the wedding day. Abigail and Elias took a rare day away from the farm. They rode up into the mountains, found a clearing that overlooked the valley they'd built their life in. "Do you ever regret it?" Elias asked. They were sitting on a fallen log, sharing water and jerky like they had on that first long ride to Helena. "Everything that happened, how we started." "Do you?" I asked first. Abigail thought about it, really thought. "I regret that I had to be sold to be saved. I regret that my father was weak and Maddox was cruel and the world was set up so that girls like me didn't have better choices." She looked at him. "But I don't regret you. I don't regret us. Even though I took your choice away, you gave me every choice you could after that. You spent 20 years making sure I had choices." She took his hand. "I chose this. I chose you. Every day for 20 years. That's not nothing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I used to think Caleb would be disappointed in me for not killing Maddox when I had the chance, for choosing law over revenge. And now I think he'd be proud of the life we built, of our kids, of how we took something that started broken and made it into something good." He squeezed her hand. "I think he'd like you. I wish I could have met him." "Me too." They sat there until the sun started to set, watching light paint the valley gold. Below, smoke rose from their chimney, their home, their life, built from nothing but choice and determination and the stubborn refusal to let the past define them. It wasn't a perfect ending. They still had struggles ahead, children to raise, crops to plant, the daily grind of keeping a farm running. They still fought sometimes, still hurt each other in small ways that required apologies and forgiveness, but it was their ending. And in a world that had tried to write their story for them, that meant everything. As they rode home through the gathering dark, Abigail thought about the girl she'd been at that altar in Silver Creek. Terrified, powerless, convinced she was being sold into a nightmare. That girl wouldn't recognize the woman she'd become, wouldn't believe that the monster she'd married would become the best choice she'd ever made. But then, that girl had never had the chance to choose anything for herself, had never learned what she was capable of when she stopped waiting for rescue and started fighting for what she wanted. The thing about forced marriages, Abigail realized, was that they taught you what mattered, strip away the choice, and you learned real fast what you actually valued. Safety, respect, partnership, love, when you were lucky enough to find it. She'd found it, in the last place she expected, with a man everyone feared and nobody understood, and she'd chosen to keep it every single day. That was the story she'd tell their grandchildren someday. Not the fear or the violence or the running, but the choosing, the daily, deliberate decision to build something good from broken pieces. Because in the end, that's what love was. Not the feeling, though that helped, but the choice, made over and over in 1,000 small moments, until choosing each other became as natural as breathing. They reached the cabin as the last light faded. Inside, their children were waiting, Callie helping with dinner, the younger two arguing about something that probably didn't matter. Elias took care of the horses while Abigail went inside. She hung up her coat, washed her hands, and stepped into the chaos of her family. This was it. This was what she'd fought for. Not perfection, not ease, but the messy, difficult, beautiful reality of a life she'd chosen for herself. And as she watched Elias come in from the barn, saw him scoop up their youngest and make her laugh, Abigail felt nothing but grateful. For the choices she'd been given, for the ones she'd taken, and for the man who'd given up everything to make sure she had them. It was enough, more than enough, It was everything.